A very good evening to all pious yogis. This evening, I shall give instructions on the practice of Satipatthana, Vipassana, Bhavana. First, I shall quote a verse from the Dhammapada. This verse is verse number 368. One who abides in loving kindness and is deeply devoted to the teachings of the Buddha will attain the peace of Nibbana, the bliss of the cessation of all conditioned things. So, if meditators find joy in the practice of loving kindness, let the mind dwell in the thoughts of loving kindness and devoted the effort and time to the practice of the teaching of Buddha, then one shall attain cessation of all conditioned things. So the practice of loving kindness is supporting the practice of Vipassana meditation, insight meditation. If meditators aspire to realize the peace of Nibbana, cessation of conditioned things, then they have to develop insight knowledge. If meditators aspire to develop insight knowledge, then they must know the correct way to practice the four foundations of mindfulness. So, whenever meditators practice Vipassana Bhavana, insight meditation, or meditators have to practice in accordance with the discourse on the four foundations of mindfulness. Starting tomorrow, meditators shall develop mindfulness constantly, continuously throughout the day. But meditators may practice about 15 to 20 minutes of loving kindness meditation at the beginning of sitting meditations. So when meditators practice loving kindness at the beginning of sitting meditation, they have to practice loving kindness for themselves for about 5 minutes. Then they may choose a good object of loving kindness and direct thoughts of loving kindness towards this good object for about 10 to 15 minutes. Then meditators shall begin to develop mindfulness by being mindful of whatever distinct object which is arising at that present moment. If meditators could not find any distinct objects, then they have to begin with an object which is conspicuous or obvious to the mind. Meditators did not have to search for an object in this practice of mindfulness. If there is no distinct object arising at that present moment, then meditators should pay attention to the basic object of sitting meditations. The first basic object of sitting meditation is the movements of abdomen. If meditators could not perceive the movements clearly, or sometimes they perceive the movements has stopped, then the mindfulness should not stop there. If there is no other distinct object, then meditators may pay attention to the other two basic objects. So meditators pay attention to the other two basic objects. The first is the sitting postures, and then meditators may choose the two clear contacts of body and note them as touching. When meditators are mindful of the sitting postures, they should not visualize the postures. They do not do the scanning of the postures. So meditators merely knows that sitting with the upright postures and know it as sitting. Then meditators pay attention to the first chosen touching point. So meditators have to choose two clear touching points and pay attention to the first one and note it as touching. Then pay attention to the second touching point and note it as touching. Then meditators pay attention to the sitting posture again and note it as sitting. Then pay attention to the same touching point again, the first touching point, and note it as touching. Then pay attention to the second touching point, note it as touching. So meditators be mindful of these sitting postures with the two touching points. While meditators are mindful of the sitting postures or one of the touching points, then meditators perceive a clear movements of abdomen. Then they can mindful of the movements again and note it as it is. When meditators are mindful of the movements of abdomen or the sitting postures or one of the touching points, then meditators perceive there is another stronger object, more distinct object. For example, painful sensation. Then meditators have to mindful and note the painful sensation as it duly occurs. So the basic objects, the movements of abdomen, sitting postures, and two touching points are the basic objects that help the mindfulness meditators to begin their mindfulness meditation during sitting. Meditators should not think that these basic objects are the most important object in the practice of mindfulness meditation. So these basic objects help the meditators to begin the practice mindfulness, and whenever another distinct object had disappeared, for example, painful sensation had disappeared, and there's no other distinct object, then meditators should be mindful of this basic object again. So meditators should practice the four foundations of mindfulness. As you know, the four foundations of mindfulness are Kaya-nupassana Satipatthana, mindfulness of body phenomena. The second foundation is Vedana-nupassana Satipatthana, mindfulness of feelings or sensations. The third foundation is a Citta-nupassana Satipatthana, mindfulness of consciousness. The fourth foundation is the Dhamma-nupassana Satipatthana, mindfulness of Dhamma. So, in other words, there are varieties of mental and physical phenomena that should be taken as an object of mindfulness. It's because sati, which is the mental process, arises depending on the phenomenon. In other words, sati, usually translated as mindfulness or awareness in English, is arising dependent of a phenomenon. It can't arise without a phenomenon. And mindfulness is always arising in the very present moment with an object. So it's not possible to mindful of a phenomenon or an object that had passed away. It is also not possible to mindful of an object or phenomenon which has not yet arisen. So for example, if there's a painful sensation arising at the present moment, mindfulness or the awareness also will be arising instantly at that moment. If the painful feeling had passed away and then coolness has arisen, then awareness will be arising with that object, coolness. So painful feeling belongs to the second foundation, mindfulness of sensation or feeling. When painful feeling had passed away, then coolness has arisen in the next moment. Then the awareness will be arising instantly, noting that coolness. So coolness is one of the bodily phenomena, rupa. So that's why meditators have to practice the four foundation of mindfulness. Because various phenomena can be arising at any moment. Some phenomena belong to the first foundation, some phenomena belong to the second foundation, or the third foundations, or the fourth foundations. So that's why the proximate cause of mindfulness is the fourth foundation. So it's not possible that meditators only want to mindful of one foundation. But at the beginning of practice, meditators could not perceive the arising of the mindfulness clearly. Meditators could not perceive that there's only one object arising at the present moment. Meditators perceive more than one object as long as the mindfulness is not well developed and concentration is not deep enough. So that's why meditators have to train the mindfulness or guide the mindfulness to the objects of meditation. For example, after practicing about 15 to 20 minutes of loving kindness, then meditators might have to guide the mind to perceive the movement of abdomens. In other words, directing the attention to perceive the movement of abdomen. If meditators did not direct the attention or the mindfulness to the movement of abdomens, then the mind will wander away, will begin to think of something, and so on. So when meditators direct the attention to the movement of abdomens, then the mind has some work to do. So in other words, the work of the mind here is to be mindful and note the movement of the abdomen as it duly occurs. If the movement has stopped, if meditators did not direct the attention, for example, to the sitting postures, then the mind will be wandering, thinking. So meditators have to put forth mental effort to direct the mind. The mind here means the attention, the awareness to the basic objects. Sometimes meditators realize that he or she is the thinking of something, then meditators should be mindful of that thinking and note it as it is. So meditators should be mindful and note the thinking mind until it has disappeared. When the thinking had disappeared, if the meditators did not pay attention or direct the attention to the basic object again, then another thinking can arise again. This is because the practice of mindfulness is not yet matured. In other words, the mindfulness is not well developed, not yet well trained. So the mindfulness that is not yet well trained, so that mindfulness seems like doesn't know what to do at the present moment. That's why meditators have to train the mind, in other words, the mindfulness, to stay in the present moment. So in order to train the mind to stay in the present moment, sometimes meditators have to direct the mindfulness to the basic objects. So when the practice is getting better, sometimes meditators will realize that the awareness or the attention of the mind move to another stronger objects, for example, a clear painful sensation, and so on. The meditators have to follow the mindfulness and note the painful sensation as it really occurs. Sometimes meditators are mindful of the painful sensation, then suddenly they realize that the mind is thinking of something. So at that time, the attention of mind has appeared there, coming to know there's a thinking. So meditators have to mindful and note the thinking as it really occurs. So it's important to mindful of this mental state, thinking, know it as it is until it has disappeared by itself. So meditators begin to realize that the awareness or the attention of mind can move to another object by itself, or meditators can realize that sometimes the attention appears suddenly with another strong object. So meditators will realize that the attention of the mind cannot stay with the same object all the time. So that's why meditators have to practice the four foundations of mindfulness. They cannot concentrate the mind on one foundation only. Then, as long as the mindfulness is not attentive and concentration is not deep enough, meditators have to make use of a technique. This technique known as mental noting or mental labeling. This technique of mental noting is to help meditators to cultivate mindfulness, to develop mindfulness, so that the mindfulness is getting more attentive, more precise, and more energetic. But meditators have to make use of this technique wisely. Sometimes mental noting hinders the mindfulness, causes meditators could not mindful of the object clearly, then they may drop the mental noting temporarily. Meditators can make a mental noting because the object has appeared and not yet disappeared. Sometimes meditators perceive a process of rising movements. When meditators are about to make a mental noting rising, but meditators don't yet make the mental noting rising, the rising movements has stopped, then they should not make mental noting. Sometimes meditators realize that there's a thinking. When meditators are about to make a mental noting thinking, but the object had disappeared, then they need not have to make the mental noting thinking. Some meditators who have gained a lot of experiences in the mindfulness meditation might not have to make mental noting frequently. Sometimes the mind will note the object by itself. For example, when meditators perceive a process of rising movements, then the mind know it by itself, rising. Then meditators need not have to make mental noting at the time. So sometimes the perception of the mind is quite clear, so the mind perceives the object instantly and know it immediately. If the mindfulness of the meditators is weak and concentration is not well developed, then meditators have to make more mental noting. Meditators during the practice, they did not have to consider or thinking to drop the noting or to know it again, and so on. If meditators always think or consider to note or not to note, the mind may become more restless and become more unmindful. When the practice is progressing, the mind will drop the noting by itself. So meditators should put forth effort to develop the mindfulness. Meditators should not mindful of the object superficially, only on the surface. That's why the characteristics of mindfulness, as explained in the Abhidhamma, as a non-superficiality, or in other words, not floating away. If the mindfulness is not attentive, precise on the object at that present moment, then the mindfulness or the attention will be floating away, for example, into thinking or into external sense object such as sound or noise. But it takes time to develop attentive, precise, and energetic mindfulness. So in order to make clear the practice mindfulness, we lay down this guideline or principle of a mindfulness meditation. So the guideline of developing mindfulness is to pay attention or to be aware or to be mindful of whatever object or phenomenon which is arising at that present moment and know it as it is. But if the mindfulness is not yet strong enough, meditators cannot see clearly the arising of the mindfulness with a distinct object or dominant phenomenon. So meditators have to guide the mind, or in other words, direct the attention to the basic object of the sitting meditation, the movements of the abdomen. If the movement is unclear at all, then they pay attention to sitting postures and then the chosen touching point. There are two types of phenomena. One is the mental phenomena and the other is the physical phenomena. And mindful of any mental phenomena that's arising at that present moment is more important than mindful of the physical phenomena at that present moment. There are various mental phenomena such as thinking, planning, mental hindrances such as sleepiness or sloth and torpor, tinamida, restlessness, udaja, and so on. All are mental phenomena. Physical phenomena consist mainly the four primary material elements. But in the practice of mindfulness meditation, meditators can only mindful directly the three material elements, fire element, earth element, and wind element. So in other words, meditators can mindful directly or sense directly the phenomena such as heat or cold, hardness or softness, movements, motion, vibration, nature support. Meditators should strive their best to sit for 1 hour. Sometimes meditators experience a strong pain, then they should be patient and be mindful and note the painful sensation as it really occurs. Meditators do not change the sitting positions or move in order to relieve the pain. If meditators have been sitting, let's say more than 40 minutes, then they feel the pain is unbearable, the mind is very restless, then meditators may stop the sitting with mindfulness and then proceed to the practice of walking meditation. So this is about the practice of sitting meditations. Every sitting meditation should be preceded by walking meditations. At the beginning of the Vipassana meditation retreats, meditators should practice 1 hour of walking meditations. In the early morning, you may practice walking meditation less than an hour. So after the chanting, you may have less than 2 hours of practice before the breakfast. So you may choose to practice walking about 45 minutes. Then you may sit for 1 hour. But after breakfast, meditators should practice 1 hour walking. If possible, they also sit for 1 hour. During walking meditations, meditators should be mindful of the movements of the feet. In other words, movements of the feet, left and right. And then meditators may increase the objects of walking meditation. For example, lifting, pushing, dropping. When meditators stop at the end of walking path, they mindful of the standing postures, standing. They may mindful and note the standing postures about 5 to 10 times. Then they should mindful of the turning movements, turning. When meditators have turned the bodies facing the directions they came, then they should mindful and note the standing posture again. Be mindful and note it about 5 to 10 times. So we can say that the movements of the feet during walking meditation, such as left, right, lifting, pushing, dropping, be mindful of standing postures, standing, be mindful of turning movements of the body. All these movements and the standing postures are the basic objects of walking meditation. So, if meditators are able to mindful of these basic objects attentively, precisely, and energetically, then the mind will not be wandering here and there or thinking of all sorts of things. So on the first day and second day of Vipassana meditation retreats, meditators may mindful the movements of the feet left and right for about 10 to 15 minutes. Then they only increase the objects of walking meditation to 3 processor movements. They are lifting, pushing, and dropping. Meditators have to train themselves to slow down the movements gradually. Meditators should realize that every process of movements is an object of mindfulness meditation. So in other words, meditators have to perceive a process of movements. For example, the movements of the left foot, then they can mindful and note left. If the movements of the left foot has not yet started, has not yet occurred, then meditators cannot note left. If the left foot has not yet moved, meditators do not focus their attention at the left foot. Sometimes some meditators focus their attention at the heel of the left foot, and then they begin to move and note at the same time. Then they think that their mindfulness and noting are very precise, able to note the movements from the beginning till the end. This way of mindfulness is not according with the guideline. It's because the movements has not yet started or has not yet occurred. Meditators focus on mindfulness there or the attention there, they only begin to move. So meditators have to perceive that the process of movements of left foot has occurred, then they can mindful and know it as left. At the same time, keeping the mindfulness with the process of the movements. When meditators are mindful of the basic object walking meditation, such as the movements of left or right, lifting, pushing, dropping, standing, and so on, if the mind has wandered away from this basic object, then meditators must be mindful of that wandering mind. At the time, meditators have to stop walking so that they can be mindful of that wandering mind or the thinking mind attentively and precisely. Sometimes meditators realize a strong body sensation, for example, piercing sensation. Then meditators have to stop walking and be mindful of that piercing sensations. So meditators have to slow down gradually. In other words, the slow pace of walking enables the meditators to develop mindfulness. If meditators intend to slow down very much, they may not be able to mindful of the movements so well. In other words, the strong intention or the strong desire to walk as slow as possible can distract the mindfulness. That strong intention or strong desire to slow down is a mental work, is a mental process. And mindfulness is another process, mental work. And meditators also have to take note mentally, making the mental note or labels. So when there are these three processes of mental work going on simultaneously, meditators may not be able to mindful of the movement so well. If meditators slow down gradually, then it seems that the intention to slow down or the desire to slow down is not so obvious and will not distract the mindfulness. At the end of walking meditation, meditators should carry forward the mindfulness and the concentration into the sitting meditations. Meditators should sit down slowly with mindfulness. If meditators wish to pay homage to the Buddha, or they should pay homage with mindfulness. So at that time, meditators should be mindful of every process of movements. For example, lifting up the hand one after another. Be mindful of the folding of the palms, lifting of the folded palms. Be mindful of bowing down and note them as they really occur. In other words, meditators have to be mindful of the process of movements in details. For example, when meditators mindful of the movements of bowing down, or they may know it a few times. For example, about 4 times bowing. So meditators slow down the bowing movements day by day. Then they may be able to increase the mental noting gradually. But the most important point here is to perceive the movements well and know it. So for practical reasons, meditators may have to practice specific mindfulness, mindfulness in details on certain activities or certain process of movements. But sometimes meditators could not mindful of the activity in details. For example, taking shower, using the washroom, and so on. It's because this facility is shared with other yogis. So yogis also have to learn to be considerate. But when meditators are mindful, for example, paying homage, meditators pay homage at their own place, so they can take their own time to slow down, so that they can develop mindfulness in more details. So this aspect of practice is known as mindfulness in daily activities. In other words, besides walking meditation and sitting meditation, all other activities belong to the mindfulness of daily activities. And constant and continuous mindfulness is one of the important factors to make progress in this meditation. So when meditators make progress in the mindfulness of daily activities, then most likely they also will make progress in walking meditation and sitting meditations. So the immediate aim of developing mindfulness is to strengthen the power of mindfulness. Meditators have to strengthen the power of mindfulness, in other words, to develop more and more attentive, precise, and energetic mindfulness. So when the attentive, precise, and energetic mindfulness is constant and continuous, then meditators shall realize the result of it. So the result of constant and continuous mindfulness is deeper and deeper concentration. The concentration gained by mindfulness meditators is known as Khanika Samadhi or Vipassana Samadhi. In other words, the Khanika Samadhi, Vipassana Samadhi give rise to clear experiences, clearly seeing the true nature of mental and physical phenomena. In those meditators, you realize anicca, impermanence, dukkha, unsatisfactory, anatta, not self, to their direct experience or personal experience. In order to realize the three common characteristics clearly, meditators also have to perceive or realize their individual characteristics clearly. Meditators also have to realize them as a conditioned phenomena or sankhara dharma. So meditators have to bear in mind that the characteristics of mindfulness is non-superficiality. That means not superficial. And the function of mindfulness is an absence of confusion. In which the mind is not confused one phenomena with another phenomenon. So when you have the chance to study Satipatthana Sutta, then you may come across the terms like contemplating the body in the body, contemplating feeling in the feeling, contemplating the consciousness in the consciousness, contemplating the Dharma in the Dharma. So here contemplating means mindful, not thinking about the phenomena. So the word here for the body is repeated twice, feeling is repeated twice. Body in the body, feeling in the feeling, and so on. So meditators mindful of a body phenomenon consider heat as heat. So meditator doesn't mindful of this body phenomenon in the feelings or in the consciousness or in the Dharma. So when the practice is getting better and better, meditators may realize that the mindfulness manifested as a mental process turning towards the phenomenon or an object. In other words, mindfulness is manifested as a mental process coming face to face with the phenomenon which is arising at that present moment. Mindfulness is also manifested as a guard. Guard means that to protect the mind from the attack of kilesa. Kilesa means mental defilements. So it's because of unmindful defilements can arise. And the proximate cause, as explained earlier, is the four foundations. But during the practice of mindfulness, you need not have to think about these characteristics or function, manifestations, proximate cause. Meditators have to pay bare awareness to every object which is arising at that present moment. And sometimes meditators have to make the mental noting so that the mindfulness is attentive, precise on that process of the phenomenon or the process of the object. So the ultimate aim of Satipatthana, Vipassana, Bhavana is to realize the true nature of mental and physical phenomena through direct experience or personal experience. So that realizations of the true nature of mental and physical phenomena, in other words, their specific characteristics as well their three common characteristics is known as insight knowledge or wisdoms. When the realization of insight knowledge is getting more and more penetrative, then that penetrative insight knowledge will lead to the attainment of the path knowledge. So the path knowledge has the power to uproot the mental defilements. For example, if meditators has attained the first path knowledge or Sotapatti Magga, so that path knowledge uproots two kinds of mental defilements, ditthi, wrong view, and vicikicca, doubts. If meditators are able to attain all the four stages of path knowledge, then all mental defilements will be uprooted completely. Then meditators will realize the benefits of practicing mindfulness meditation. There is purification of beings. Here, purification of beings means purification of the mind. The mind of the worldlings, Putujana, is tainted with all kinds of defilements. This defilement can only be removed or uprooted completely by the path knowledge. So, wish all meditators be heedful to the teaching by virtue of your practice in Satipatthana meditation, so that you could purify your mind from all kinds of defilements and attain cessation of suffering in samsara eventually.
สาธุ สาธุ สาธุ